Yeah, it's not in the budget. I'd like to kind of give you a brief overview of the budget. And then I really want to turn it over to you, because that's what this forum is about. It's about answering your questions. It's about hearing from you with your thoughts on the budget. And I'm willing to stay here as long as it takes to hear as many of your questions and to give as many of the answers as I can. And if I can't answer your question, just give me your name, number, email, and we'll get back to you with an answer, if there is one. I want to start by also saying that this is not a budget I support. This is not a budget I support for a number of reasons. First and foremost is that this budget does not address the real problems we have here in the state of Connecticut, and that is we have a spending problem. And that's what this first slide shows you. On the bottom here, we have Connecticut's population over the last 40 years. And then you have spending adjusted for inflation, so it's constant. This is Connecticut's problem. It's a problem of spending. And the governor's budget doesn't address that for a number of reasons. Let me just draw your attention over here. $19,325 million is what our expenditures are this current fiscal year. What the governor proposes to do, if you read his books, is to spend $19,738 million. That's an increase. It's going in the wrong direction. It's not addressing the true problem of spending. But to get to this $19 billion, you have to subtract what you heard probably a little bit about, a $1 billion concession from the unions. So what's the true expenditure? $20 billion. That's not addressing the problem that the state of Connecticut has, which is excessive spending. Here's a question for you all. You get a $1 billion concession this year. You get a $1 billion concession next year. We haven't curbed the expending appetite that the state of Connecticut has. What happens in year 3? Where are we?
Same spot.
Worse.
Do you have the $1 billion now?
They don't have the $1 billion now. Yeah. I think that today was the first day they sat down, or yesterday was the first day they sat down. So true. That's another issue. Here's something else which is related with respect to the $1 billion. It's kind of an easy, kind of a lazy way to do budgeting, isn't it? Because the hard work isn't done. The hard work of going into the agencies, finding out where the waste and excess is, and trimming it isn't done. And I think you guys will be surprised to hear that most of the phone calls I get are from state employees. And they're upset. Not so much about the $1 billion in concessions. They're upset because they're getting hit twice. They're getting hit with a $1.5 billion tax increase, which we'll talk about. They're getting hit with $1 billion in concessions. After they get through that, then they say, oh, by the way, let me tell you about all the waste that's going on in my agency, which is what we really should be tackling today.
Even elimination in some cases.
Well, they're not talking about that. But anyways, so there are real issues out there, and this budget isn't addressing those real issues. Now let's look at where the money comes from, because this underscores, I think, another very important point. So when you look at the revenue that we're going to be taking in the proposed budget for fiscal year 2011, 33% of that is coming from personal income. Your income taxes are going up. If you own a home, it's going up right away. And then depending on your bracket, it's going to go up even more. Sales and use tax, which in this budget is going up globally and then going up with respect to specific items, and federal funds. But what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now with respect to federal funds? They're changing. They're shrinking. Is that money going to be there? Maybe it'll be there this year. Is it going to be there next year? Maybe not. Year after that? Maybe not. Meanwhile, we might be losing revenue here without addressing the true problem of curbing state spending, which is going to create even greater pressures on sales and use taxes in the out years unless we address expenditures today. This will be in your handouts. Feel free to take a look at that. But let's move on to the advance to two more slides, Peggy, if you could. One more. And so these are the parade of horribles that we need to address and ought to be addressing. We ought to be addressing these with legislation. And for those of you who followed the campaign, you've heard my 4 points to turn this economy around and create jobs. And that is to make it cost effective to employ people here in the state of Connecticut, because right now it's $2,000 to $3,000 more expensive to employ somebody in Connecticut than it is in Tennessee. So what do businesses do? So we need to attack the mandates coming out of the legislature to deal with that. We need to tackle energy costs. Okay, we have the second highest energy costs in the country, second only to Hawaii. Hawaii makes sense. Connecticut doesn't. And there's a way to do that. There's a short-term fix by having the legislature stop increasing our energy costs through taxes, and then also creating more energy within our grid and within our state. And I've proposed bills on all of these. And we need to get state spending under control as a third prong. I can't tell you how many factories I've been to who said to me, Jason, I can add another 5,000 square feet to this factory today and employ more people, but I won't. Why won't I? Because all that means right now is I will be incurring a bigger cost of paying the debt, of paying the taxes down the road. So I'm not going to expand right here. We've got to change that. We've got to get spending under control. And then we need to make it easier to do business in the state of Connecticut and with the state of Connecticut. Right now, it takes 6 months to get permits done in Connecticut when it takes 6 weeks in Oklahoma for the same permitting. That's what we need to address. So here are the parade of horribles. The other thing the budget doesn't address is the $60+ billion in unfunded liabilities, which is where some of these figures come out. $4,500 per capita in unfunded pension liability we all owe. $7,800 in state debt per capita we all owe. We got to get that under control. And you know what? That's where we need concessions from the unions. Right there. Not this temporary fix. Come on in, guys. Not a temporary fix of $1 billion this year, $1 billion that year. Long-term structural fixes, something I talked about in the campaign. Happy to talk about it more today. Peggy, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Why don't you advance it one more? So what are we dealing with as far as increased revenue? $1.5 billion. 58% of that from increases in income tax. Excuse me. This is the solution we're talking about. So 58% of the governor's budget of solving this $3.5 billion deficit that you hear about, more than half of that is going to be through tax increases. 30% of that and 13% of that on the spending side. That's not an equation I can get behind. I'm sure it's not an equation that you guys can get behind as well. Here's a little bit better breakdown as far as this $1.5 billion tax increase, which is the largest in the history of this state. $878 million from personal income tax, $461 from sales and use tax, 73% 73 million from businesses, sin taxes, energy taxes, second highest energy costs in the country. What are we going to do? We need more generation in the state. What are we going to do? We're going to tax those who generate. And you know that goes right to the ratepayers at the end of the day. Now, think about some of these taxes. You probably heard about them. We've got a tax now being proposed on coupons. Okay? You trade in your car to get a new car, taxed now. We have one of the highest per gallon prices of gas in the region, in the country. 60% of that price, 60% of that price is, guess what? Tax. And oh, by the way, the governor's budget proposes to increase the tax on gasoline. Now, there are lots of potential solutions out there, lots of them. One of the things we need to do is talk to the people who work for the state of Connecticut, those people who are calling me with ideas about how to economize, and we need to start looking at those. Here are a lot of other ideas, but there are many, many ways to close this $3.5 billion gap without raising taxes, and that's what we need to consider. Now, that's kind of a high-level overview of what I wanted to just to share with you. If you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of a real-life example of how this is going to hit you. Say you're a married couple, you're a police, the husband's a cop, the wife's a nurse. This is what you could be looking at in yearly increases in your tax. Now, this could go much higher. It really can. It's going to depend on consumption. It's going to depend on a lot of variables. Now, think about this. Let's say you took that $1,000, $1,200, whatever it is, each year, stuck it in a bank, or invested it in what have you, 6%, 8% interest over the next 20 years. I mean, you're looking at $70,000, $80,000. That's a big chunk of somebody's potential retirement. This is real pain. You guys feel it. I feel it. This budget's a whack to the middle class. It's not something I can get behind. Now, I'd like to hear from you guys. Questions, thoughts, comments. This time's really about you. So